Hello out there. Hey, folks. Just waiting for my co host to jump in with us. And we'll wait for a few minutes for people to log on. But of course, I'm Kristian Roberts. I'm waiting on my fabulous friend and co host, Quo Johnson, to join me. And of course, we are coming to you live today with an episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian and Quo. So I will wait on her. In the meantime, everybody say hello. Tell me how you're doing out there. What's the weather like where you are? All of those things. I want to know. Oh, and where you're joining us from. That would be cool. I see people. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Hey, Quo.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi,
Hey,
everyone.
Bernard. Bernard said, hey.
Hey. Hello, Bernard. Hey. Hi, everyone, and thank you for hopping on. Thank you for joining us. I heard Kristian kind of doing a check-in, and check-ins are so important. So I heard her say, let us know where you are, let us know how you're doing, let us know how your day is going, let us know how your week is going.
Yo, Bernard is in Dallas singing with DSO. Hey, that's our neighbor.
Come through, Bernard. That's cool.
Bernard, you
That's
should have
awesome.
said something. Maybe we could have done a socially distanced meetup.
Hello to Chicago. Oh, you can't see me waving
Yeah.
this way. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for joining in.
He said, hey.
Hey. Actually, I worked for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra before I worked for the Dallas Opera.
She worked for
So
them both at the same time at one time.
same time for
Every
7 years
woman I
straight.
know.
For 7 years because I'm about this arts life. Um, real talk, real talk. So before we get started, wanting to welcome everybody into the space. Welcome everybody into today's conversation. I want to preface the conversation for today by saying that it is heavy. And so we want to make sure that in being in communities of collective care and of self-care, in communities of responsible storytelling, in communities where we acknowledge our humanity, that we put that at the forefront, that today's conversation, all of our conversations are very meaningful, and we've had amazing guests and amazing conversations. Today's conversation comes from a very raw and a very vulnerable place for both myself and for Kristian. So thank you all for joining us in this. We invite you to also join in that boldness and in that vulnerability, but also in the accountability and the things that come out of this conversation, so that as we continue, that raw and that vulnerability, all those things start to build into community. That's my beginning.
Yes, yes. But I'm trying to just wait to get a few more people on. But absolutely, this is an episode that is very close to home and quite difficult to talk about. And I almost told Poe I did not want to do it, but I do not want to run away from it because it's very important. But it is hard. It's a very difficult conversation. So, but it needs to be done. It needs to be talked about. And we really need to have a real conversation if we are to move toward real solutions and progress. So here we are tackling one yet again.
Here we are.
So let's just dive right on in. So for those of you who are just joining us, I'm Kristian Roberts. I'm here with my fabulous friend and co-host.
Quo Johnson.
And we are live today with an episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian
And Quo. One of the things we continue to do, because it is important in how we commit to connecting with our communities. It is important in how we commit to healing the harm and how we commit to moving forward together in our beautiful art form, but also just as a community and in society, is a land and people acknowledgement. So I want to take this time to acknowledge that we here in Dallas, we are on stolen land. We are on the land of the Caddo, of the Wichita, and of the Comanche sovereign nations. Nations who cultivated the land, nations who lived on the land, who fought, who loved, who created stories, who had the full human experience since time immemorial. Nations that faced horrible conditions, that faced genocide, that faced policy that allowed for their forceful removal by any means necessary. Specifically, especially for this episode, I want to take the time to uplift the Indigenous women as well as those communities here within Dallas, as well as abroad, right? Dallas is not the only one on stolen land. The entire nation is, in fact, on stolen land. I then want to take the time to acknowledge the people who were stolen from their homes and brought here to Dallas and forced into labor. And from that forced and free enslaved labor, we have what we now enjoy as Dallas. Again, Dallas is not alone in this, as the entire nation benefits from an economy that is built on stolen land and stolen labor. Whether the state was a slave state or not, right? We're still in a space where we're able to build on those things. Being a descendant of those individuals and taking the time to uplift the women from both of these communities, I thank you for joining me in this land and people acknowledgement, and the hope that we continue to move forward together, and the hope that we continue to build together on truth, and the hope that we continue to make things happen in a way that is meaningful and that is transformational. So thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us today and for tuning in with us. Um, we always have to give a shout out to our friend and our brother, David Lameli.
Hey,
Um,
David.
One of the coolest cats that ever walked the face of the planet. And also a shout out to the Dallas Opera staff, of course, for their support. And of course, a shout out to you all for your continuing support and continuing to watch and ask questions and be in conversation and community with us. So very much appreciate you continue to support and tune in. So, let's just dive right in. The title of this episode is quite purposely titled Say Her Name.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of weight behind that. There's a lot of emotion behind that. There is a lot of, I don't want to even say angst behind that. Even addressing this, I have to say that even right now, I'm feeling my heart is pounding a little bit just because it is a very difficult subject. But one of these things that we have said from the jump when we did this show and we started this show last year was to say that we were going to dive into truth and we were going to tackle the quote unquote hard subjects, and how hard they are depends on who you are, and what lived experience that you have. And for us, this is a very real part of what we have to contend with on a daily basis living in this nation. And I can't speak for anybody else's nation. I'm going to speak from where I live. So I will never speak over or in place of anybody else. So the first thing that we want to talk about is what we always talk about: truth telling. And in this country, we have issues. We have issues surrounding women in general. We have issues surrounding women of color, and for Quo and I in particular, these issues hit close to home because there are many surrounding Black women. For the trailer for this show, we read out a list of names
Yeah.
whose lives have been snuffed out.
And that
Due
was a
to
small list.
That's a small list. We wouldn't have got, if we would have read that, we probably would have been reading for days, So it was difficult for us to even make that trailer. I'm just going to be very, very transparent. There are problems in a society where patriarchy reigns supreme and continues to reign supreme. And in a country where white supremacy is an issue, it rains down harder on women of color. And as a Black woman in particular, I can attest to that. Now, folks can get mad if they want to. You can say that I'm lying, that we don't have issues, but I'm telling you my lived experience and part of my lived experience. I'm telling you what my mother and my grandmother have told me. I'm telling you what my sisters and my cousins have told me. I'm telling you what my father has witnessed that his
Mm-hmm.
mother deal with. I'm telling you what our families know to be true from lived experiences. So that's how I'm going to open this. Well, I'll turn it over to you. And if you want to talk a little bit about why you wanted to tackle this subject as well.
Absolutely. And so it is Women's History Month. And in this, of course, in the ways that we can be creative and in the ways that we can take responsibility and in the ways that we can be accountable for what it means to question the narrative and what it means to expand our connections to have fuller narratives, I wanted to take the time to, one, highlight this very real issue, right? And the fact that we don't just go along just to get along, and in the fact that we are all facing very real differences in how we engage in society and how we are able to live our lives. Having someone question your experience creates this form of supremacy in which, in order for me to validate whatever you're saying, and in order for me to believe whatever you're saying, I myself have to understand. So I first wanted to bring to the forefront that we will never understand somebody else's experience. We can be empathetic and we can have similar experiences, but to demand that someone translate their own experiences into your personal individual understanding is a form of supremacy, because you're therefore designating whatever they say invalid until you yourself validate it. And that's problematic. And this kind of right to comfort in this assumption that you're the only one, and this assumption that you know what's best, this paternalism, this maternalism as well, and the ways that we approach other people, it comes down to you need to trust what people are sharing. And you need to trust what people are sharing as a part of the whole truth, and not that your truth is more important than another. You cannot at any point go through the process of celebrating those whom you silence. It's not possible. You cannot simultaneously celebrate someone and silence them at the same time. And so as we're coming off of Black History Month, as we're going directly into Women's History Month, as we will continue to celebrate various communities, it's important that we tell the truth and the whole truth. In this, there is a movement here in the United States, hashtag say her name, because Black women are disproportionately affected by violence from police. I named it this episode 1 so that we can place that at the forefront and let people know that even as we're doing our work in opera and as we're creating all these beautiful opportunities and these beautiful stories, yada, yada, yada. And as we're on this wave, right, we are all committed to diversity, that we are also acknowledging the very real and detrimental effects of valuing diversity at the expense of others. At Dallas Opera, you'll hear us say that we're not aiming for diversity, right? As company culture manager, we're not aiming for diversity because that turns into check boxes, and that turns into bringing people into hostile environments without preparing the environment itself. So yes, diversity and whatever that means is a result of the work that we're doing, but we're not aimlessly just going and picking people so we can bring them into very hostile environments that do not acknowledge the very real differences in how we expect to move through this life and how we are forced to move through this life, and the ways in which we have to strengthen ourselves to move through this life in different ways. So I wanted to speak truth to that first and foremost by saying that there is a difference. There's definitely a difference. And I wanted to also provide opportunity to address the murders of last week, but not just last week, of all time. As expansive and as big as that is, as expansive and as big as that is, just the history of violence that we have in this nation. So whether or not you yourself experience it does not negate the fact that it happens. I don't need to experience everything in order to trust that those who say, hey, this is what I experienced, that it actually happened. So as we're going about this and as we're looking to tell stories and we're celebrating and we're uplifting and we have all these statements, it is problematic to fix your mouth, to say that you are celebrating, to type these statements, to make all these commitments without truly looking at what it means for somebody else to have to come into the space and continue their work, knowing that they themselves are a target, that their parents are a target, that their loved ones are a target in ways that other people don't even realize. So I wanted to first acknowledge that weight, and then I wanted to place that weight in the space so that we don't have to walk away with it the same way. I say this all the time in our company culture sessions at the Dallas Opera, right? We're going to create this space so we can do what we need to do in this space so that when we walk away, we are strengthened by the things that we share in this space. That's my very long introduction as to why this episode is what it is, but also why it is necessary to have these conversations in opera.
Yes, and I say again, Opera is not exempt from the problems that we face in our society. Opera is, if anything, a microcosm of what we see in our society. If it is out in the world, it is going to get through your opera house doors. And we know that because we've had a year of having very in-depth conversations in the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of Tatiana Jefferson, in the wake of Breonna Taylor, in the wake of all these people. And now last week, what we saw with our Asian American brothers and sisters and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters last week in Georgia. There is a problem. We're not making it up. How much more evidence do you need? And if before anybody comes on here saying this is anti-cop or something like that, first of all, if I'm getting my house broken into, you best believe I'm calling the cops to come protect me. This is not negating that line of work. That is a very dangerous line of work. And I will
Yes.
never negate that. I don't have, well, I'm gonna say something terrible. I don't have the nerve to do a job like that. And I respect anybody who does. You're literally putting your life on the line for people you don't even know. So I say that about all of our medical workers, our frontline workers, our EMTs, our firemen, our police folks. Listen, that is very real work. So before anybody hops on here, but what we're talking about is the way in which communities are the result that happens from supremacy,
Yeah.
supremacy ideology. I'm stuttering because this subject really gets to me, but
Yeah. Yeah.
from the ideology that comes out of that. And if you think that it's not going to trickle into every facet of our society when the country was built on it,
Yeah.
again, one only need what happened last week. One only need, I mean, it's that's just the way it is. All right. So I wanted to make that very clear too, right out of the gate for this episode. All right. But it's also difficult to be put in a position where you say, I need to call the police. Should I? I'm worried, you know, and that's
That's
sad
real.
because it shouldn't be that way.
That's real.
It shouldn't be that way. So I'm not dismissing the very real feelings behind that either. All right, there are very real things and real change that really does need to happen. But again, it's an issue in this country. Violence, not violence from anybody in this country. Violent behavior. It's too much. It's too much. We have our children running drills in school. Used to be fire drills, tornado drills.
Yeah.
We're running from AR-15s. I mean, come on. This is
And
not cool.
we want to take the time in this space, since you brought it up, Kristian, about false equivalence.
Yes.
I don't think we've dove into that subject. False equivalence. Someone's job, which very beautiful, very brave job, and someone's life,
Yes.
not equivalent. Your feelings in reaction to something versus somebody's very real impact and how they are able to access resources so that they can live their lives safely, not equivalent, right? So as we're looking at these things and as we start to acknowledge that they are simply tools to distract us from the true issue. And the true issue is that we are in a system that does not honor our humanity as a whole. There is a hierarchy in value of human beings, and even the hierarchy itself is false. And even in looking at the ways in which so many of our industry, not just leaders, but just individuals or artists, are being crippled by the lies and the falsehood of white supremacy. Questions of how do we engage with communities? Go talk to them. But even in going to talk to them, there's still problematic things that come up because you're not sure how to talk to individuals without censoring self, without the very venomous and the poisonous things that come out of this structure affecting the ways in which you can engage with others. Right? We saw the example even last month about the Black History Month celebration, celebrating Black artistry, but everybody on the poster presents as white or is racialized as white, and not even understanding the ways in which when we center and when we uplift individuals, it's to center and uplift individuals and fighting that narcissism that comes with continuously being centered in everything, which is a result of being in a white supremacy culture. And the ways in which everybody is robbed of something, right?
Everybody.
We're robbed of actual celebration. Others are robbed of the ability to actually celebrate others. So as we talk about these things, we want to be honest and we want to look at ourselves and look at where we have landed. We want to look at the fact that there is violence against women. We want to look at the fact that women are expected to adhere to the needs, to the desires, to the expectations of men, and for it to be dismissed as, oh, he had a bad day. Oh, it was
Yeah,
an accident. And whether or not your life and the value of your life can be weighed against, again, false equivalence. A bad day.
a bad
Whose
day.
bad day? Because my bad day can't go that way, right? Not in the
Right.
same way. And so what we want to look at is making sure that we're having honest conversations in a way that does not allow us to be distracted by people's emotions, by people's feelings. I'm not saying do not feel it. Feel it. This is emotional. I'm going to have everybody go through breathing with us like we always do at the Dallas Opera because it's necessary in sending signals to our nervous system that we're okay. But it is holding the entire work hostage because you're uncomfortable
Yes.
with truth.
And I will say this because I notice again, there's a fatigue that keeps coming around. And I will say again that if you're tired of hearing about it, imagine having to live it. So when you tell me that you're tired of it, or you show me that you're tired of it, what you're saying is you're tired of me saying that I just want to live my life. And to me, that speaks volumes. There is a fatigue that comes with this. I'm not dismissing very real human
Mm-hmm.
reactions
Yeah.
to things. Okay. What I'm saying there is a time and a place for that. And again, if you feel weighed down and burdened, having to go through sessions, have to talk about this, have to look at policies or anything like that you're doing for your organization or your own personal work, imagine what it's like to have to live that every day and still have to go through that work to
And
educate
still
people.
do work. And not just wake up and do your work, right? To still have to manage those things on top of educating, on top of having the grace to make sure that you're representing yourself and others well, on top of the trope of having to be twice as good and showing up in spaces
Yep,
because the way that culture norms happen and that take place without being verbally expressed, people have certain expectations. And because of the way the system supports those who most benefit from it, who have the privilege of deciding when and where to apply those culture norms. When and where should we be objective? We're in meetings and you're upset that something didn't happen, and who gets to be upset in those spaces? Who gets to be passionate about the art, and then who gets to be the angry Black woman?
exactly.
Right? And so as we look at these very real differences, again, false equivalence, and then as we look at the difference in between those who have to live experiences, those who have been silenced in their own experiences, and then those who just have to take that very brave step to step into ownership of your own experiences. Again, we've all been robbed of things. All of those things that were taken have not been valued at the same weight. They should not be.
But what does
Right.
it say about a system that um, because they don't want to integrate the public pools, they decide to close the public pools for everybody? That means that Black people didn't get access to the pool, white people didn't get access to the pool, our American Indian brothers and sisters did not get access to the pool. Asian Americans did not get access to the pool. I mean, do you understand what that lie of supremacy does?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The people who could afford it, they weren't really affected by it because they had their own private pools. But, average Joe Blow, me and you, nobody got the pool. So in order to keep it from going to a certain group of people, to marginalize folks, you shut the whole thing down and deprive everybody of it.
Yeah.
That's terrible. And that's just a small example. So when we say that racism and this supremacy and this racial hierarchy robs everyone, we mean it really does rob everyone of something. And the
Everyone.
access to public pools is just one example.
Example. Let's talk about the access to truth. And the ways in which we have unrealistic expectations, right? This very binary thinking of either or. Either I'm an expert and I will participate and I will lead, or I am not, and therefore I don't have to participate. I don't have to show up. Suddenly, people are so vocal about the fact that we need to be creating communities. We've been needing to create community. People have been trying to create community. People were benefiting from the fact that we were not creating community, and now suddenly we have something to say because
Yes.
either I'm an expert and I will lead, or I will be silent and I will continue to benefit. So in this, as we're making kind of, I don't want to say rounds, right? Making our rounds because we're coming up on an anniversary that shook the world, right? The murder of George Floyd, followed by the acknowledgement, right? Because it took place at different times. The acknowledgement that Breonna Taylor's life was not deemed more important than the wall.
Yep.
The
The wall.
wall. When we say her name, that is what we mean. The wall. The wall. And when we say her name, we want to acknowledge what it means for people to be dismissed and for, again, false equivalence to be presented as if that were the solution. When the solution that is actually being sought, whether inadvertently or purposefully, is absolution from guilt,
Yep.
is being able to not be uncomfortable in conversations anymore. So let me present this one thing that actually has nothing to do with what you're talking about in a way to argue you down, as they say, so that we don't have to have this conversation as opposed to facing it. Again, it is not your friend. This system is not helping you. This system is not something that we need. The system is not something built on truth, nor is it something to which we can actually achieve whatever the desired goal is. It's a combination of culture norms that dismiss humanity in so many ways. So when we say her name, this is what we are saying. When we say her name, we are calling out all of our organizations to make a very real commitment, not with your statements. Yes, statements are good, but the system allows people to make statements and feel like they're done. I made a statement. I put up a black box. I said that I stand with you, all these things. And I turn around and no, you don't. We can tell. We can tell when you're not telling the truth.
Yeah.
It's a
People
thing.
know.
We can
And the
tell.
thing
And this is
is,
a
it's
matter of longevity. This is not for the
yeah.
light of heart, nor is this for those who feel like they can just jump into the commitment and be an expert at it. This will be uncomfortable. It still has been uncomfortable. It will be uncomfortable, most likely for the rest of your life. But that is okay because that is what's necessary in order for us to break free of a system that literally taught us that this is how we are supposed to operate. This is how our organizations are supposed to go. We are supposed to create art without asking the community. We're supposed to use other people's experiences for our own entertainment. We're supposed to determine who gets to play what role in what ways, why, and how. We're supposed to make sure that we are gatekeeping in different ways for the sake of the art form. Look at all my quotation marks,
Mhm.
because all of those things are constructs that have very real consequences, much like this system of race, much like this system of patriarchy, much like this system in which women are not valued holistically. So as we are celebrating women this month, be mindful, you cannot celebrate those whom you silence. And celebration looks like uplifting. Celebration looks like making way and then getting out of the way, right? Make way,
Mhm.
move out of the way. And then celebration looks like being in community in a way that does not demand that you are constantly leading, that you are constantly the voice of authority, because that's unrealistic, and that you are not constantly the voice that's receiving all the attention just because you know how to navigate the space. And when I say navigate the space, control the space, because power hoarding is a thing.
Well, and I also think celebration means standing up. You know, when you see something that's not right, you have to stand up. So if you're going to celebrate and uplift me as a woman, if you're going to celebrate and uplift me as a black woman or a black person, anything like that, you're going to celebrate me. That means also standing up when wrongdoing happens. You know, we all have things to lose when we stand up for anything. But the thing is that to do the right thing, sometimes you will lose something. Sometimes you will. But there are a lot of people who stood up for something and they lost their lives. They lost their lives. So the question is how committed to you are, and a lot of us aren't in situations where we actually will lose our life if we stand up and say, "Hey, that was a misogynistic remark. You need to cool on that." You know, a lot of us are not in those situations. So if you can't handle that, you know what I mean? This is a problem. So we
Yeah.
need more of that. You have to stand up. You have to say something. You have to, when you see something that's not right, you have to say, "Hey, look, that doesn't look right to me," and understand that there are some of us that have more to lose than other people. So when you're sitting in the room and you call yourself an ally, and I don't care if I don't care if you're being a BIPOC ally. I don't care if you're being look. You can be if you're an animal activist, whatever it is you claim to be for, then you need to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you stand up for it and you say something. Because there
Hmm.
are a lot of times where, and then if once you say something and have made your voice heard, if that person of color, if that woman is in the room, or all of the above are in the room, then you move aside and let her speak for herself. Want to talk
Yeah.
about celebrating women? You uplift them and you stand up for them. All of these,
Yeah.
remember, uplift, stand up. Up is a theme today. Up, up, up. It's a theme today. So
Yeah.
that's what it looks like. And even in the situations with say her name, the part of the reason why that movement was started and why we say these women's names is because remember how history is. Remember why there's a Women's History Month. People were deliberately left out, deliberately erased, deliberately silenced. We can't do that anymore. So that's why we say her name.
Hmm.
Okay, there have been people that have started say his name, say their names, and all that kind of stuff. But the root of that movement is say her name, and it was to uplift the voices of those who were killed wrongly. To say, hey, this is wrong. We got to do something about this. Say her name so people do not forget. Okay, so that justice is served. All right. So that's all there is. That's all there is to it. If you say you're going to celebrate somebody, if you say you're going to lift them up, then that is the way in which you do it. Quo gave you good ways to do it. I told you how to do it. Um, and I'm sure there's more. But
Yeah.
these are the things that you can do. These are things that don't require an entire I mean, you standing up and saying something in the room when you see something wrong or something that's one of those off-color remarks, things like watermelon jokes, all this kind of stuff. Say something. It's not right. It's not right.
And and speaking of, since we're in the space, right, of false equivalence as well, we want to talk about intent versus impact.
Yeah.
I believe we've spoken about it before. And it's something Dallas Opera is definitely making sure that we embrace. Intentions are for self, impacts for everybody else. To take up time making sure that people understand, accept, and embrace your intentions rather than focusing on the impacts is a distraction and a form of supremacy. Because in this is saying that my intentions, while they should be acknowledged and they are acknowledged, are more important than getting the work done. We had somebody in the chat say that it's time for let's talk more about policy. Absolutely. And the very real conversations that need to take place in order to create effective policy make sure that we are not focusing on just intentions, spending all this time talking about how good of a person you are. We know you're a good person. We know that is not in question. This is not binary thinking. We're not worried about whether or not you're a good person or what your intentions were in this. This is what the impact was. Oberlin's intention was to make sure that they celebrated Black artistry. The impact was, even in Black artistry, we will center whiteness. Now, with the artists that they had available at the time, that's debatable for others to figure out. But with what was presented, it's still the very real effect of, even in trying to celebrate someone else and their history and their artistry, we will still censor whiteness. We will still censor and show you images, which is the very mental thing, right? Show you images of the ways in which you are othered. Intentions versus impact, non-equivalent, right? And even in this, as we move forward into the conversation about intersectionality and what that means, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term, and what that means for us to acknowledge the very real weight in the differences. BIPOC
Mhm.
experiences are not interchangeable.
We are not a monolith.
All women's experiences are not interchangeable. Yes, there's a different weight that took place last week because of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in response to that, in addition to the other lives that were lost as well, right? Different people respond to these things in different ways. We all have different experiences and how we got to this country or how we were already here. Shout out to our indigenous brothers and sisters, and the ways that we have to respond to this system that says that here's a hierarchy. Here's what is at the top, whiteness. Here's what is at the bottom, blackness, and the anti-blackness that moves us toward and away from black and toward white supremacy. We have to be honest about those things. And then we have to make sure that as we are honoring all of our different experiences, that we're not attempting to switch out one for the other. That is a very real and negative effect of valuing diversity over valuing truth, over valuing belonging, over valuing making sure that we are expanding who makes decisions and how. So
But I
with
will say
this,
this, Quo. Let's talk about pitting one against the other as well.
ooh, yeah, that's another episode, but I'd like to introduce that this right here, right now. Again, we're all suffering and we're all being robbed of something. The lie of scarcity says that you cannot address the needs of one community while addressing the needs of another when we
You
all
can walk
need
and
to
chew gum at the
dismantle
same time.
when we all need to dismantle this system. And that is something that has been taking place. And that is a tool of the system to say, oh, well, suddenly you're taking away from this movement. And we need to focus on this movement. This is not the first time this has happened,
Nope.
specifically in right history, specifically in what this means right now for this time for these communities right now, and what it means for us to again come together so that we can dismantle this very real system that says that your humanity is not valued. So we want to be honest about that. We want to be honest about intersectionality. We want to be honest about the ways that white women and those who are racialized as white are the most protected female group in this nation. And that those very real experiences differ from women of color. We have to be honest about those things.
Yep.
Again, these are not things that we've created. These are things that we've inherited. But if we do not acknowledge them and acknowledge the root of these issues, then we continue to perpetuate this system that does not dismiss people's struggles, that does not dismiss the ways that we do not all have advantage in the ways we think we do or in the ways that others think we do. But there's very real. Look at our leadership. Look at our leadership right now in opera. We'll stick with opera field and then we'll expand that out. Look at our leadership right now and the men and the women who have access to executive decision making. We are not the same. We are not experiencing life the same way. And that is okay. The issue comes in when you start to decide how much my life matters and how much access I have to resources. That's where the issue comes in. This is not about acceptance. This is about equity. This is not about equality. This is about accountability. And it's wrong to say that it's that simple because that's very complex. But on the higher arcing scheme of it, it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. I said last week, and and I'll say again, and if you will ask some of those women who are CEOs, okay, they will tell you the fight they have on their hands in the room. Now multiply that by being a black woman or a indigenous woman or an Asian woman. It's a different fight.
Or Latina, right?
Yes, and again, this is not the oppression Olympics. Oh, I'm more hurt than you, and this is hurts more than you. No. This is not what this is about. We just want to make sure that we also acknowledge the nuances that exist between groups of women. That's it. Okay, between BIPOC women, this is what we want, and people. Period. But there are nuances, and we'll dive into that into another episode because we'll be here all day.
All day, right? But even in acknowledging those nuances, also acknowledging that we have the ability to address those nuances in such sensitive, such effective, and such meaningful ways. When we pull away from the idea of equality, right? And when we focus on equity, we cannot get to equality. We cannot get to equal until we make sure things are fair. Otherwise, that is oppression, inflation. Stop inflating oppression. Stop these things. And so as we look at what it means for us to be like, oh, okay, you can have some, you can have what it means to spread it across the board, knowing that not everyone has had the same access, or that not everyone is starting from the same place. Not everyone has the same needs. It provides us with this false idea of success that further burdens those who are needing to fight harder just to get into the room, who are needing, and not because of anything that's happened or any decision that they've made, but because of very real decisions that were made centuries ago, determining whose lives would be valued more. And again, that still robbed us all of connection, because again, we have communities, we have leaders who are like, well, can you teach me how to do these things? And it's like, you should know,
There's
but
a
you
there's
don't,
a there's a whole field,
because the
and
system lied to
yeah,
you too.
they and the thing is, there are now, DEI certificates. There are now emotional intelligence courses and coaches and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all of these things are in place so you can learn how to treat somebody like a human being. I understand that they're necessary because they are, but it's scary that we have to have those kinds of tools.
Yeah.
That's scary. um you don't know what people are going through, and I 100% understand that. But if you're going to be working with people, unless you're a hermit or something and decided to be by yourself, if you're going to be around other human beings, period, and I don't care if this is in your organization, I don't care if this is on your stage, I don't care if this is in the grocery store, if you don't know how to treat another person like a human being, this is a problem. If you don't know how to talk to the whole person, this is a problem. And it obviously is a problem because, again, we have now have new fields of study to specifically tackle these issues. My friend on this call right now is specializing in this, okay, on how to look at systems, how to look at policy, and how to look at human beings,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and how all of the nonsense of the past has affected us right now, how all of the false narratives that were put in place have real consequences right now. And if anybody knows me, they know I'm a study of history. And sometimes I get baffled. I absolutely get baffled when we find ourselves right back in the same place that we were before. When George Floyd happened, when Breonna Taylor happened, all of those things happened. All I could think of was Trayvon Martin,
I
Tamir
was gonna
Rice,
say Trayvon
Sandra
Martin.
Bland. I was like, we've been here before. How
Been
are we
here
back
before.
again? Because we do not learn. And we have to get to the point where we learn, where we look back at history and we learn from our mistakes and figure
Mm-hmm.
out how to clean it up better for the next time. And we are in a position in this nation right now where we have seen a lot in a year. Okay.
Yes.
So many things have happened in a year, and we saw where the holes are clearly. The pandemic, the racial injustice, all of these things. All right, now gun control has come back up. You know what I mean? Like I say, these things get repeated all the time, all the time. But the pandemic it just busted the whole thing wide open. Now the question is, and in our education system, the inequities in our education system, okay, the very real effects of gerrymandering and redlining, all that stuff just bubbled up to the surface. You couldn't miss it, right? What
The
are we gonna
very
do now?
real, the very real devaluing of our frontline workers
Yes,
in those situations.
yes.
So as
And
we
what do
as we
most of
start
our frontline workers look like?
as
Essential
well.
workers.
Yes.
What do they look like?
Yes.
They identify as.
Yes. And as we are pulling back these layers, I encourage us to do so in a manner that centers truth and in a manner that centers connection. It is not beneficial to know that something is festering, a festering wound, right? I'm a Langston Hughes, all of us right now. It is not okay to know that something is festering and to leave it as is, or to cover it up for our own personal benefit. It is
And just put
difficult,
a
yes.
band-aid on it.
Or put a
You got an
band-aid on it.
arm that's falling off and you put a band-aid on it, and you're like, wait a minute. There
Or
are
at the
sometimes when you
expense,
get a wound on your leg, and in order for that wound to heal properly, you have to, it's going to hurt. Okay,
Yeah.
you have to lance it. You have to open it up. You have to clean out the infection. Okay, you have to put medicine on it. You have to pack it. You have to stitch it up. Whatever it is you have to do, you have to go on antibiotics, and that is a process that takes time. And at times, it can take months. It can take years for that wound to be fully healed. And if you don't believe me, ask any of your doctor friends or your surgeon friends. They will tell you it takes time to heal that wound. This is the same
And
thing that we're dealing with right now. You, in order for fully heal it, you're going to have to lance it open, and you're going to have to clean out the icky stuff. That means get into the bottom and the dirt and the core of what happened. And in this
yeah.
country, there was a lot of stuff that happened that nobody wants to talk about. And there's a lot of shame associated with that. There's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of denial associated with that. But the bottom line is, if you keep letting that wound fester, you'll lose the whole leg. You use the whole body. You may die. you know, that's just how it is. So the question is, are we going to go through some pain right now to clean this up and get this thing cleaned out like it's supposed to? Or are we going to continue to let it fester until it's beyond the point of no return, right? It's beyond the point of no return where the doctor comes in the room and says, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's been allowed to go on too long.
And
I
even
just,
not that it's just been allowed to go on too long, because I want to also speak to the very intentional ways that when we choose to center our own experiences and when we choose to center whiteness, the construct, making this very clear. This is not individuals who racialize as white, who identify as white, and all of our beautiful ways that we can identify ourselves. This is the construct, the very real creation of an identity that was placed above everything else and said that this is what you must adhere to. This is what you
yeah,
must strive for everybody, right? So as we look at this, it's very intentional. So it's not just we're just like, oh, we left it alone, but understanding again false equivalence and what that looks like when we are purposefully saying that, oh, this is difficult, and then when we are purposely saying, I don't want to do that because I don't
choose
think
not
I
to
have to.
engage. Yeah,
I don't have to. I can go
makes
home
me
and do
feel better.
whatever. Makes me feel better right now not to do that. Makes me feel better every time we have this meeting not to engage and not to participate in these things because I feel that I was not raised in that type of society. Again, feelings versus impact, not equivalent, right? No one who was born in this nation can say that they were not raised in a system of white supremacy. The nation is literally built on it. Literally. Genocide, right? Demon variations, manifest destiny, as I call it, genocide. And then in bringing others into this country to work to say that they are not human beings, and then opening up the country for everybody else to come in and then try and find their ways into this hierarchy. So we want to be honest about those things. In addition to that, as we are looking at these conversations, it is not enough just to feel something. Yes, we're going to feel it. And that's the beautiful thing about who we are. That's the beautiful thing about what we do in this art form. We have to move beyond just saying her name and just saying names, just speaking truth into the space, into allowing that to guide the actions that we take. It's not enough to feel bad. It's not enough to go read How to Be an Anti-Racist. It is not enough to start to read these things and, oh, I went to this training and then I learned this. It's not enough. It's very, very surface level, very beginning, a beautiful and a bold step, but still it is at the beginning of a very long journey that we are taking together, that we need to take together, that we can take together, and that we should take together. So as we're looking at responses to what is happening, being mindful of false equivalence, a statement is not always an indicator of progress. A mistake is not always an indicator of being stagnant. So I encourage us all to embrace that. I encourage us all to be bold in how we speak truth. I encourage us all to say her name. I encourage us all to start to pay attention to the very real ways that there are differences in how we respond to life and how we are treated in life, and to be mindful of those things within our organizations when we're working with our coworkers, and to be mindful of those things when we're placing stories on stage. We are beyond the point of asking permission. Can you please let us tell our own stories? We're beyond that. Like we're beyond that point. We've explained it. It's been explained in every single medium.
Mm-hmm.
People have danced about it. People have wrote about it. People have sung about it. There is a whole thing. There are lists of things. It is okay for us to let it go. It is okay for us to start to embrace these very beautiful ways that we can start to create community and that we can start to serve and that we can start to uplift one another through this beautiful art form. That's my indirect positive notes.
Well, and I will say this: once you start doing that kind of work internally on yourself, within your organization, within your own homes, whatever it is, when you and your organization go to engage the community, that can be felt. People know that. And there are times where you're going to have to engage your community in different ways. You're going to have to ask, what do you need? As a matter of fact, that's the first thing you should ask when you're thinking about programming. You should set meetings with leaders. You should talk to folks in the community. You should talk to your neighbors. You should talk to people and see what is going on. Because here's the thing: if we continue to approach it with this is the greatest thing on the planet, and here you should experience it, it's still going to come across exactly. You're laughing at me, but it's still going to come across as that well, for lack of a better term, bougie. It's going to come across as bougie. It's going to come across as exclusive. It's going to come across as out of touch, and all of those things. But if you are authentically already trying to do the work, and again, work on self, work within your organizations to create change, then that is going to be reflected every time you step out to work with your community. It's going to be reflected every time. Are you going to make mistakes? Of course, we're human. That's what we do. The question is, what do we do after the mistake? So those are very important things to think about right now as we are looking forward and we're looking ahead, and we look at the ways in which we how we are with the women in our lives, how we are with the women that we work with, whether that's our professional or personal lives. This entire month, we've been talking about the women in our lives, and we felt like this episode, we needed to address some of the things real things, very real things that have been happening in not necessarily in our lives, but definitely in other people's lives, and things that we feel on a very deep and personal level, and how something as simple as a hashtag that says say her name can lead into an entire discussion of things
Mhm.
that it can be reflected in, right? Because we've not just talked about those women who were wrongfully killed, okay, and their families left to contend with that loss. We've talked about the effects that has on everything and how it can be
Mhm.
seen in everything, not just for women, but black women, but for other women of color, how it affects women in general. I mean, and how it affects our workplaces and all of that stuff. It ties into everything. All right. I always say that history does not occur in a vacuum. Okay. Many things go on at the same time. Folks, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Okay. We do. We can.
We're
And
extremely
do that.
creative.
That's exactly, especially for
We're
opera.
extremely
We
creative.
literally have to do the
I tell
equivalent
people
on
all the
stage.
time, we are an extremely creative industry. We literally play pretend. We put a hole in the wall, we put a hole in the floor, we tell stories. Entire industry based on that beautiful and bold creativity. We can develop solutions to these issues. It
Yes,
takes us jettisoning ourselves, right, from the very real barriers that prevent us from acknowledging truth, those same barriers that prevent us from saying her name.
exactly. So, folks, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna toss it over to Quo. She already gave us a lot of positive notes. I am glad that we did this episode, even though, again, like I said, I have probably been all over the place and stuttering, but it's a very difficult subject, again, because it does
Be
hit close to
real.
home. It's just very real. But Quo, positive notes.
Positive notes. I will start by saying Christian and I actually sat down to pre-record this episode on Monday and could not because it was too heavy. That is the absolute truth. And that being the truth, because we are affected by this in very real ways. We are all affected by it. We do not have the choice to ignore how we're affected by it. That is the difference. So I encourage all of us that as we seek to celebrate and as we uplift one another, that we are mindful that you cannot silence someone and celebrate them at the same time. It is not possible. So as we look at telling stories, as we look at uplifting our communities, as we look at authentic engagement with our communities, it requires that we address the very real barriers that prevent us from acknowledging our own humanity and the humanity of others. This is real, but so is our ability to address it and to heal the harm. So as always, take heart in that and knowing that you don't have to do it alone. It starts with the conversation. Again, as we're looking at intentions and impact, as we're making sure that we're not, adhering to that binary thought process. This is not a question of whether or not you're a good person. It's not a question of whether or not you should take up space defending whether or not you're a good person. Other people should not have to take up space defending their own humanity. I should not have to take up space. Christians should not have to take up space. My mother, my sister, my friends, no one should have to take up space defending their humanity against someone who would rather pause or prevent progress because of emotions,
Yeah.
because of how they feel, because they don't feel comfortable with having these conversations and talking about these things because they're used to being comfortable and believe that they have the right to comfort. So knowing these things and knowing that it is not just you, but it is you in different ways. It is not your fault, but it does become your responsibility because you're capable of doing those things. We are capable of doing these things. I encourage all of our organizations. I encourage all of our artists. I encourage all of our community leaders to band together in what this means. If we're going to do this work, this is what is required. Otherwise, you're wasting time. Don't waste time and just be real. Say you don't want to do it, and that's okay. But know that you will be left behind because we're, again, beyond the space of not being able to live with one another. We're beyond the space of being able to ignore one another. We're beyond the space of being separated from one another. So this is part of the work, everyone. And so I say take heart in knowing that you don't have to do it alone. Those are my positive notes.
Folks, be bold, stand up, be creative, use your voice, use your voice for others who are not there, and continue to do what we do best in this field. We are storytellers. We are problem solvers. Let's lean back on this and let's get the work done, y'all. It's as simple as that. We're going to sign off now. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of
Yes.
your day.
Thank you all. Love and light.